From the nation's capital, Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce. A weekly discussion about the federal issues most important to Nevada. And now, from Washington, D.C., here's Marilee Joyce.
Good day to you. I'm Marilee Joyce, and this is Eye on Washington, the only statewide Nevada news program produced in Washington, D.C. Every week, Eye on Washington takes you straight to Capitol Hill for a discussion with Nevada's delegation and other leaders about the federal matters that matter to you. Today's topic, the price of your security. We're going to find out how my guest is impacting what arguably is the most important budget in this nation and abroad. And he is my guest today, Nevada U.S. Congressman Joe Heck. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Well, think of the largest companies you can, Walmart, ExxonMobil, GM. Would it shock you to know that there is one government agency whose budget dwarfs theirs and that employs more people than all of them combined double? It's the Department of Defense. And today on Eye on Washington, we'll look at my guest's big role in the DoD budget authorization process. We'll find out three big areas he oversaw that have received a lot of press in Nevada and nationally. And we'll learn why his chairmanship of an armed services subcommittee is so important for you in Nevada. The Defense Department budget is $419.3 billion. And it has more than 3 million employees. Compare that to Walmart, $227 billion and 1.3 million strong force, or ExxonMobil's $200 billion budget and its 98,000 workers. GM and Ford don't come close either. The funding provided to the DoD covers its basic budget, which pays for the department's normal activities and its contingency operations in Afghanistan and elsewhere overseas. Congressman Heck has a big say over the National Defense Authorization Act. That's the federal law that specifies the budget and expenditures of the department. Now, I do want to look at your place in funding what's far and large the largest budget in our nation. But I want to start with this. What is the responsibility of the DoD in general?
Well, certainly
the whole department.
The whole department is to provide for the national security of our nation. It's to assure our allies, to deter our adversaries, and to respond to crises. And so it's a very large organization when you have a global responsibility to keep our nation safe.
Why is security so expensive?
Well, when you look at first the manpower costs of the number of people that wear the uniform and all of the civilians that are involved in supporting the warfighter through DoD, you're looking at 3 million people. When you look at the costs of having a forward presence all around the world, some people will say, well, if we brought more troops home and closed down bases overseas and kept them in the United States, we could contain costs. You would contain costs, but at a price of being able to respond quickly to areas where there is a crisis. So the cost of keeping forward deployed. We project strength by keeping our men and women in uniform deployed forward in areas of crises.
What are your concerns? What does it mean to security when we see these the budget cuts? And a lot of people would like to see bigger cuts, of course, and base closings and threats of same.
Well, you know, there's always this adage that you have to do more with less. In defense, that doesn't work. You do less with less. And it is an expensive proposition. But that comes from the United States' responsibility of being the sole military superpower throughout the globe. We are the ones that provide military leadership around the world.
What are examples of negative things that have happened when we've had cuts?
Well, you can look at just even the withdrawal of our troops from Iraq before there was any commitment to actually have that nation have a functioning government. That created a vacuum. And that vacuum led to the growth of ISIS, which now we're going back to Iraq to confront again. So when you make decisions based on politics or on budgetary numbers, in the long run, there's always going to be a negative second or third order effect when it comes to our security.
Could you give us some examples of how the DoD budget matters specifically to Nevada? You know, military personnel at the state's bases, of course, but what else that might not come quickly to mind?
Well, you think about every dollar that DoD invests in a base or in a person that's stationed in Nevada, whether it's at Nellis or Hawthorne or Fallon, has a follow-on and a ripple effect through the rest of the community. Those are people that are in Nevada, that are living in Nevada, that are utilizing services out in the community. So there's this multiplier effect on our economy from the dollars that are invested by the Department of Defense. Not to mention the fact that 85% of our state is owned by the federal government. A large portion of that is the National Test and Training Range. And so bringing in all of our allies that come in to train there also have an economic impact on the entire state.
You know, every year there are cries for reducing the DoD budget and complaints of redundancy program and overpriced equipment, overruns, etc. Then there's a counter side that says, no, actually we're spread too thin, some of the examples that you just gave, for instance, and that we barely have what we need. What say you? Well,
there are certainly always room to improve our procurement and acquisition processes. And in the National Defense Authorization Act that we just passed last week, there are a lot of reforms. Certainly we do spend money in areas where we could probably be better stewards of the taxpayer dollar. And so under Chairman Mac Thornberry's leadership, we've put in procurement and acquisition reforms to try to tighten up where we're spending taxpayer money. But nonetheless, it's still a very important expenditure to make sure that our men and women in uniform have the training and the resources they need if they're willing to risk their lives to keep us safe.
And again, as we've expanded our presence in overseas skirmishes, other operations dealing with ISIS and other step-ups in our anti-terrorism efforts in general, in your opinion, has our budget kept pace?
No, our budget certainly has not kept pace. We've seen under the Budget Control Act reductions in defense spending. We've had to put more money into what's called the Overseas Contingency Operations Fund rather than in base budgets. And when the money's not in base budgets, it's very difficult for the Department of Defense to plan out over the 5 to 10 year window. And that further makes it even more difficult for them to be able to respond to crises in the future.
So you do have some big special concerns about its ability to stretch enough to meet even our current needs, let alone our future needs?
I certainly do. At the current funding levels, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said that that is the absolute lower ragged edge of what was necessary for us to keep our nation safe.
And on that good news, just ahead, 3 DoD budget areas my guest oversaw that Nevadans have had their eyes on. We'll tell you about it after this.
You're watching Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce. Brought to you by Caesars Entertainment, the Las Vegas Sands Corporation, the Regional Transportation Commission of Washoe County, the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, Boyd Gaming, Rogich Communications Group, and by Jim Marsh Automotive.
I got my own iPod Touch and use my dad's login to get on gambling sites. Poker is the best, but I'm losing a lot. Since I'm too young to play, they're not allowed to keep the money and my dad won't find out. That's right, isn't it?
Want more federal news that affects Nevada, its businesses, and its residents? Then you need to subscribe to Nevada's Washington Watch newsletter, your sole source of online news direct from Washington, D.C. Visit joycecommunications.com and subscribe today.
All of us at Caesars Entertainment have something we want to say.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
We don't want you to gamble if you've had too much to drink.
You shouldn't gamble if you're lonely or depressed.
And if you're under 21, you're not allowed to play.
No, no, no.
No matter which of our casinos you come to, our message is always the same.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly. We know you're coming to our casinos to have a good time, and we always want you to leave feeling like you did.
And welcome back to Eye on Washington and our discussion of the nation's most expensive agency and my guest's oversight of part of its budget. We're visiting with him today, Nevada U.S. Congressman Joe Heck. Little trivia for you. The act that funds our Defense Department is formally named for John Warner. He was a U.S. veteran, Secretary of the Navy, former longtime Senator, and Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman. Little trivia for you. So if you think Nevada doesn't care much about the DoD budget, you should think again. The state has more than a dozen military facilities employing a whole lot of people. Then there are the Nevadans serving overseas, and the fact that Nevada has seen the largest percentage increase in the number of veterans in recent years. So add it up, and you have a big federal funding need. In late April, my guest House Services, Armed Services Military Personnel Subcommittee approved its portion of the act for fiscal year 2016. And in his remarks about that funding bill, Chairman Peck highlighted several policy provisions contained therein. He mentioned the preventing of retaliation against members of the armed forces who report sexual assault, the establishment of a unified medical command, and the improvement of military pay and the retirement system. Now, I want to start with the act's effect on sexual assault, because you're really credited, I'll blow your horn, I know you never will, but you're really credited seriously with leading the effort on this in the House. And I know that we talked before about the big hearing that you chaired and the video that came out of that. But, you know, ever since this terrible story hit the news, it's really been in the news, and you've really fought against it on the Hill. Remind our statewide audience of this eyesore and your efforts to improve it, and also what the budget has meant to it.
Well, it's very unfortunate that the armed forces across all branches of services seem to have a higher rate of sexual assault than the general population. And when you think that somebody is willing to volunteer to join the military and put on a uniform and serve their nation, that should be the one place where they would be safe from that type of assault. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And so over the last several years, Congress has tried to enact varying levels of reform, laws, regulations that would help curtail this scourge on those in uniform. So this year we had a report that came out, judicial proceedings report, that identified some shortcomings in current military law, so we attempted to address those. We also addressed making sure that those who are whistleblowers, those that report, whether they're the victim or a witness of a sexual assault, have protections against retaliation. And also something that we've seen recently is an increase on male-on-male sexual assault. And so we've enacted provisions to address that as well.
That was a couple of things you said a couple of steps ago, that provision to prevent those from reporting, from being harassed. There's been so many issues in the media that we see where people who are the whistleblowers, they are then later treated so poorly. And so it's great that the act does contain it. How frequent a problem was this, and what were you hearing in Nevada?
Well, we've always, across the nation and even in those serving overseas, we get the reports of those that have been victims of sexual assault, which also includes not necessarily a physical assault, but also sexual harassment. We want to create an environment within the military where the individual who has volunteered to serve feels protected and doesn't have to worry about those types of unwanted advances. And so over the years, we have seen a potential increase, and we've had some very significant scandals that have been reported. Certainly the one down at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, where there was kind of a culture amongst the Air Force trainers with their new recruits of sexual intimidation and sexual assault. And so we want to make sure that, especially when somebody is just coming in and putting on their uniform and reporting for their initial entry training, that they're doing so in a safe environment and that they can concentrate on what they're there for, which is to learn how to be the best service member possible.
What's a unified medical command, and how does that affect Nevada?
So right now there are 3 different medical commands throughout the armed forces, one for the Army, Navy, Marines, and then the Air Force. So this bill calls for all 3 of those medical commands coming together to form one command, which will help streamline medical policies, I think help increase the quality of care that we provide, because it will be a uniform quality of care, and help contain costs. And healthcare costs are one of the biggest growing areas within the DoD budget.
You know, I know that you and other members of our delegation have been very concerned about military pay and how Nevada's service persons and veterans are kind of making ends meet. What increases does your part of the defense bill offer? Well,
in our defense bill, we supported what would be the normal pay raise for this coming fiscal year, which would have been a 2.3% pay raise. Unfortunately, the president's budget calls for only a 1.3% pay raise. In the last 2 years, the pay raise put forward by the administration was less than what would have normally been the pay raise as dictated by law. So there is a concern that not only is the individual seeing a 1% decrease this year, but that decrease compounds over time.
Wait, to be clear, the 1.3 is what went through?
The 1.3 is what has been put into the Senate bill, and so we wind up going to negotiations when we go to conference. But the last 2 years, likewise, the administration's proposal was a full percentage point less than what otherwise would have been their pay raise. And so now that 1% compounds year after year moving forward. Congress, back about 10 years ago, made significant gains in trying to get pay equity between the uniformed services and the private sector. And now when we don't give those normal called for pay raises, we start losing that ground.
You know, when the act passed, you mentioned that you said that without a pay boost, we're just not going to get the best talent available. So While people might think, oh, it's okay, maybe we'll get a raise in a few years or something, it's when we're talking military, it's a lot more serious to you than that, isn't it?
It certainly is. I mean, fortunately, our economy is on the rebound. And when our economy is on the rebound, fewer people are looking to join the all-volunteer force. Sure. And so when you're competing against the private sector, you've got to be able to provide a pay and benefit package that's competitive to be able to get and keep the best and brightest, which is what we should have in uniform.
And when we come back, his authority over authorization. Let's discuss my guest's big chairmanship assignment. We'll have details right after this.
Nevada's direct link to Capitol Hill. Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce. The only statewide Nevada news show based in Washington, D.C. All the top federal matters that matter most to Nevadans. Marilee talks with our congressional delegation and other leaders about the federal news you need to know. Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce. Nevada's Eye on Capitol Hill.
I got my own iPod Touch and use my dad's login to get on gambling sites. Poker is the best, but I'm losing a lot. Since I'm too young to play, they're not allowed to keep the money and my dad won't find out. That's right, isn't it?
All of us at Caesars Entertainment have something we want to say.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
We don't want you to gamble if you've had too much to drink.
You shouldn't gamble if you're lonely or depressed.
And if you're under 21, you're not allowed to play.
No, no, no.
No matter which of our casinos you come to, our message is always the same.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly. We know you're coming to our casinos to have a good time, and we always want you to leave feeling like you did.
I never felt all that special. But in the wake of an earthquake, we can all do something. When donating goods, it's hard to know what's needed. So now it's my turn to help. Aid workers can spend me locally, where I can help save lives. Someone is doing better because of me. Together, we made that happen.
I got my own iPod Touch and use my dad's login to get on gambling sites. Poker is the best, but I'm losing a lot. Since I'm too young to play, they're not allowed to keep the money and my dad won't find out. That's right, isn't it?
And welcome back to Eye on Washington, our discussion of military needs in Nevada and beyond, and my guest's influence over decisions related to them. We've been visiting with Nevada U.S. Congressman Joe Heck. So just what is the House Armed Services Military Personnel Subcommittee? And why is it so great for Nevada that my guest serves as its chairman? Well, the Military Personnel Subcommittee is responsible for military personnel policy, reserve component integration, and employment issues. It oversees military health care, military education, and POW MIA issues. A few things we haven't mentioned: it rejects any increase in out-of-pocket costs for military families or reduction in housing allowances and commissary benefits. It improves the transition to civilian life and veteran employment, including job training and placement services. And it supports funding financial literacy programs for service members. And, you were really excited when you were appointed chair of this subcommittee, and your press tells me that the position's a big win for Nevada. Tell us why.
Well, certainly I was very honored when Chairman Thornberry selected me to serve as the subcommittee chair. I had asked him for the position, thinking I was just throwing down a marker for some future opportunity, because there were several members higher in seniority than I who also wanted the position. Ultimately, he came to me and said that he thought I was the right person at the right time for the job, primarily because of the recent Military Compensation and Retirement Modernization Commission's report, which made 15 recommendations on how to make the pay and benefits program for our service members more competitive with the private sector. And he thought that I'd had the background to be able to address those issues. And certainly with the large military population that we have within Nevada, the committee's activities directly impact on their well-being and quality of life.
You know, I want to make sure our audience knows, you know, you're an emergency physician with the Army yourself, and I know that you serve on reserve, correct?
Right. Yes.
When a lot of times when you're going back to the district, you're juggling your congressional district meetings with some other Army needs as well. So I don't know when you sleep when you're out there, but doing both. But I think because you're an Army guy yourself, you bring something important to my next question. You know, this subcommittee basically is tasked with making sure our troops and their loved ones have first-class care, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's job training. And I think that might be a big reason you love this subcommittee and that you have an influence over that.
Sure. Well, in the 24 years that I've been in the Army Reserve, in the medical corps, it's always been taking care of military members and their family members. And then having had the honor to command troops, you become more involved with the quality of life issues that service members and their family members face on every given day. And so since this is the committee that truly has the greatest impact on what will make our men and women in uniform and their family members want to stay in the military or make the future recruit want to come into the military, I thought it was a great place to serve.
You know, after you serve, you're getting back into civilian life. And I mentioned the areas that this works on, but I want to look especially at job training, you know, not just with the military, but job training has been big to you as far as getting people who, for instance, don't have technical skills up so they can compete for the best jobs, adding programs to our universities and in Nevada, Reno and at UNLV. For getting veterans back to work has been a huge issue of yours. How is the budget overall helpful in that, and what are some of the areas you're working on there?
Well, so the budget helps fund the programs that will help that service member transition to civilian life and hopefully into a good paying job. And one of the things we've been working on is trying to get more credit for the training and skills that a military member gets while he's on active duty to cross over to when he becomes a civilian. For instance, you might have somebody who's a heavy equipment operator or a truck driver. They should be able to have that same job when they come home, or a paramedic, a military medic should be able to work as a paramedic on the civilian side. And so we've worked to crosswalk the responsibilities and the training between those on the military side and the private sector so that it eases the transition into those civilian employment opportunities.
As we wrap up this segment, what real impact do you think that this DoD budget's going to have on Nevada for both the good and the not so good?
Well, certainly the House budget that has been passed for DoD meets the President's request. So we know that we are meeting the requirements as put forth by the administration, and that's going to be important for the folks at Nellis, Fallon, and Hawthorne, because it provides, again, for their military pay and benefits. There's military construction projects that are going on at Nellis as well. So, and all of those things will have a follow-on impact on our economy.
As it goes on now to the Senate and hopefully to quick passage, do you see a lot of changes coming? Do you think it's going to maintain as it looks now?
Well, there's always a little bit of a difference between the House version and the Senate version, and we'll go to conference committee and work those out. But for 54 years, Congress has passed a National Defense Authorization Act, and we're hoping that it continues this year.
Well, that it'll pass, but do you see any of the numbers changing
well, the Senate has put in the same budget number as the House, so hopefully it'll stay.
Okay, great. Thank you. And just ahead, hey, Kim of Las Vegas, your letter was selected for our mailbag segment. We're going to read it next.
All of us at Caesars Entertainment have something we want to say.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
We don't want you to gamble if you've had too much to drink.
You shouldn't gamble if you're lonely or depressed.
And if you're under 21, you're not allowed to play.
No.
No matter which of our casinos you come to, our message is always the same.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly. We know you're coming to our casinos to have a good time, and we always want you to leave feeling like you did.
Nevada's direct link to Capitol Hill. Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce. The only statewide Nevada news show based in Washington, D.C. All the top federal matters that matter most to Nevadans. Marilee talks with our congressional delegation and other leaders about the federal news you need to know. Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce. Nevada's Eye on Capitol Hill.
I got my own iPod Touch and use my dad's login to get on gambling sites. Poker is the best, but I'm losing a lot. Since I'm too young to play, they're not allowed to keep the money and my dad won't find out. That's right, isn't it?
Help Nevada Humane Society save the lives of orphan kittens by becoming a foster care volunteer. Over 2,000 kittens a year need temporary care.
These kittens need food and personal attention until they're old enough for adoption. Foster care is fun, rewarding, and truly saves lives.
I love fostering. I have fostered almost 50 kittens so far, and it is so rewarding.
If you can foster kittens for a few weeks, we can find them homes for life. To learn how you can become a foster care volunteer, call or visit Nevada Humane Society.
Want more federal news that affects Nevada, its businesses, and its residents? Then you need to subscribe to Nevada's Washington Watch newsletter, your sole source of online news direct from Washington, D.C. Visit JoyceCommunications.com and subscribe today.
And welcome back to our closing segment of today's Eye on Washington. Of course, it's our mailbag segment. In this segment, we tell you about an issue that the congressional page of the Joyce Communications website has been getting a lot of correspondence about. We read one of your letters right here on the air, and we invite our guests to respond to you. And Congressman, we've been hearing about Nevada's struggling schools, and I have a letter for you from Kim of Las Vegas. And she writes, "Dear Congressman Heck, what's the one thing you think could be done at the federal level besides funding support that could help Nevada's struggling schools?" What do you say to Kim?
Well, thanks, Kim. That's a great question. And I sit on the Education and Workforce Committee as well. And what we're trying to do right now is actually give more flexibility to local school districts and states to come up with the plans that they need to be able to educate their students. Look, education is not a one-size-fits-all proposition. Even in Nevada, we have different needs from Clark County out to the rural counties up to Washoe County. Very little money comes from the federal government to Nevada when it comes to education funding. In fact, the Clark County School District's budget is only about 10% federal money, but it comes with an awful lot of strings attached, and they have to spend the money where the federal government tells them to spend it. What we want to say is, you know what? You know better where to spend the money that we're giving you. Why don't you spend the money that we're sending from the federal government where you need it most? And we need to empower teachers, administrators, parents to make the best decisions. The best decisions are made locally, not in Washington, D.C. when it comes to education.
So the big thing is letting states have more control, and people on up here on the Hill who don't live anywhere near Nevada wouldn't really know where best to put that money. Is that what you're saying?
It's exactly right. When we give the money, it comes with specific requirements. And some of those requirements are meant to meet certain provisions within law. And what we want to say is, as long as you're meeting those provisions in law, if you have money left over, spend the money where you need it, not where we're telling you to spend it.
What's your role in helping Nevada's kind of come out of the last place for schools?
One of the areas I'm working hard on is career and technical education, because I think that's the opportunity to make sure that all students graduate college or career ready.
Okay. Thanks for being here today.
My pleasure.
On education and the defense budget, two great topics. See you again soon. And you know, you can send a letter to one of Nevada's senators or House members. Just go to our website, JoyceCommunications.com, and check out more federal issues that impact Nevada while you're there. You can like us on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, and check out any Eye on Washington shows you may have missed on our YouTube. Thanks for joining us on today's Eye on Washington. I'm Marilee Joyce in Washington, D.C. Have a good day today.